Well, we've all heard it and we've all seen it. And on a daily basis, the second we get our driver's license, we start to take notice of all of the drivers around us. And all of us start to take notice of all the people we've known throughout our life and mistakes and a lot of things they think are right. This goes everywhere. But when it comes to driving, there's so many things that people get so complacent in that they don't realize that the rules of the road are constantly changing. And a lot of things that most average drivers do is completely wrong, and in a lot of cases is dangerous. Today, AutoLooks is going to take a look at the mindset of your average driver. Welcome back to the AutoLooks podcast. I am your host, as always, the doctor to the automotive industry, Mr. Everett J, coming to you from our main host website at AutoLooks.net. If you haven't been there, stop by, check it out after you listen to the podcast, read some of our reviews, check out some of the ratings, and go to the Corporate Links websites and find all of the automotive corporations, big or small. We have them all on the Corporate Links website page on the AutoLooks.net website. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by Podbeam.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over at email@autolooks.net. So like I said in the beginning, we're taking a look today at your average driver. We're not talking about someone like myself or someone like Lewis Hamilton. We're talking about your average driver. And for myself, I always like to point out some specific people, even in my life, who seem to think that driving is a right. And I'm sorry to say that driving is not a right, it's a privilege. And the most dangerous people out on the road make up two main categories. The people who think it's a right and the people who think that driving is simple. I get this all the time from friends and family. They think everybody can go out and get a driver's license. It's simple. Anybody can drive a car. Well, I don't know about you, but you've probably heard this meme and seen it like a million times on any major social feed or even gotten it from friends, where it's got the grandfather, the father from Grumpy Old Men, holding a beer and looking at you going, I know a lot of people with university educations that are still morons. And it's so true. There's so many drivers on the road out there as your average driver who don't know how to drive. On a daily basis, go out and check the amount of drivers in front of you that either, one, excessively speeding, two, not using turning lanes properly, three, not using their turn signal, and four, not obeying the traffic lights to their intended purpose. Now, I'm not to say myself that I am a perfect driver or one who abides by all the rules out there. No, like the average driver out there, no. 95% of us break a law every single time we get behind the wheel of a vehicle. 95%. And police know this, but they can't go out and give you tickets for everything. They can't give you tickets for not clearing your snow off all the time because there are so many people that break that law. They can't give you speeding tickets because technically, by law, anything over and above the posted speed limit is speeding. So even 1 kilometer or 1 mile over that is speeding, and you can be fined. Not putting your signal light on for an actual proper duration before turning. Illegally turning from driving lanes. Not utilizing turning lanes, merge lanes, and even yield lanes properly. Seriously, when you're on the road next time, check your average driver and see how many people in and around you in a 10-minute drive down the road to go and get something who break one of these laws. I see it all the time. And my most hated one of all time are people camping in the fast lane. I don't care if it's a 4-lane road and there are 2 lanes and the speed limit is 80 kilometers an hour and you're doing 80 in the fast lane. If 90% of the people in the slow lane are doing 80 and everybody else in the fast lane is speeding, you're not abiding by one simple characteristic of actual driving. And if you've actually taken a driver's course or read your handbook, you'll understand that there's 2 things that are completely wrong with this site. One, you're not supposed to drive in the fast lane because the fast lane is for overtaking slower moving vehicles. You're supposed to get out, pass them, and get back into the slow lane. And number 2, you're supposed to maintain the flow of traffic to a set amount, even above or below what it's going. Yes, it says that right in the book. Maintain the flow of traffic, but not excessively. So if everybody in the fast lane is going 10 kilometers an hour over the posted speed limit, and you you want to do bang on the speed limit. By law, yes, you may be correct that you can do 80 kilometers an hour in the fast lane, but that gray area circumnavigates you and posts you as breaking the law of the flow of traffic, because the flow of traffic is going 10 kilometers an hour faster than the lane beside it. And if you are not passing somebody, you are impeding the flow of traffic, which is another ticketable offense. The state of Arizona, one of the great states in the US, is now ticketing people for camping in the left lane. It doesn't matter that some of these people are going a little bit above the posted speed limit, but when they catch somebody who's driving in that fast lane and people have to move into the slow moving lane to get around them, and it's not just one person, we're talking about multiple people. The police officer will pull over people that are excessively speeding, but if all these people are, let's say, like going 5 miles an hour over the posted speed limit, they're not going to pull over those 10 people going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. They're going to pull over that moron who's going slow in the fast lane. And I know you've heard us all before when I talked about, the Don't Slow Down podcast, where I initially explained the laws of physics to you, how an immobilized object will cause more damage than a mobile object at a similar rate of speed. Okay? But that's not one of the only things that the average driver. I have heard this, especially from my father-in-law, and I always like to poke fun at him because he literally likes to tear into me constantly because he thinks he knows more than me. And he also likes to point fun at me for liking racing because I have an understanding of the automobile. He deems a vehicle as a conveyance to go from point A to point B only, and he doesn't have to learn how to properly operate it because he's been driving for 50-some years. Well, I don't know about you, but if I have a doctor and I'm on the operating table to get open heart surgery, I want the doctor who goes in every year and checks up on all of the new information, new technology out there, so he has the best set of knowledge skills to do my open heart surgery. My father-in-law is the other doctor who went to school 40 years ago, and everybody has found one of these people in the workplace. That's the way it's been done, and that's the way we always have done it. Those are the people who refuse to move on in society. And we have drivers on the road like that. Hell, like I said, my father-in-law is one of them. He literally thinks his car is just a conveyance, and he doesn't have to go out and learn new rules of the road because he's done it so long, and it's his right to drive. Well, my father used to think that until the time that he had a medical condition where they deemed him unacceptable to drive his vehicle. When he lost his right to drive, when the doctor says, "You are in no condition to drive," and they pulled it away only for a short amount of time, only because they thought he had, an epileptic episode, which really he actually just lost oxygen to his brain. He was actually laughing so hard at a John Candy movie, he literally was gasping for air. So they actually deemed it improperly, but he had to go a few months without his driver's license. And when he got back behind the wheel, he realized this is a privilege. They allow me to drive. Well, yeah, it's a privilege. And every single year, being an automotive person like myself, I read into new laws and I check into new things. And when I get my vehicle, I'm actually one of the few people who will open up his owner's manual and learn something about my vehicle. I know most of the parts of my vehicle. I know how to fix a lot of the parts of my vehicle, so I have a good understanding of it. Like I said, when you hire a mechanic to fix your car, do you want the guy who literally took his mechanics course 40 years ago? I'm kind of bringing up the same thing as the doctor, but who do you trust more? The guy who has up-to-date knowledge or the guy that did the knowledge 40 years ago and still thinks he could do it because it hasn't changed? Race car drivers. I'm going to bring this in because racing actually is more susceptible to how we drive and the vehicles we drive than anything else. All new technology comes from racing cars, and it's been going at it for decades. Race car drivers, you may think they just get behind the wheel and they race. Well, that's literally bullshit, because these guys actually physically have to train with the amount of G-force against their bodies, constantly up and down between, 0.5 Gs and 2.5 Gs for select corners, constantly over a 2.5 hour period. Plus, they need to be a specific weight. So these are light people going super fast under intense conditions, where at the end of the race, they actually lose weight during a race. These guys are constantly constantly learning. My son realized that last year when he got into go-kart racing, and I told him, you're good, you know lots, but you can always learn more. My father taught me this at a young age, and it's one of those things that a lot of people, when they start driving, don't understand. The average driver just thinks, I got my full license, that's it, I don't need to learn anything else. All I have to do is remember there's a gas, there's a brake, and my shifter. Well, I'm going to point this one fact out to you. Does everybody remember, about a decade ago when they had that big controversy over the accelerating Toyotas? The accelerated paddle that they couldn't get down? They eventually deemed it was actually one specific part tied to, sorry to say this, a Canadian manufacturer, but in some cases also because people were doubling up on winter floor mats and that gas pedal actually wasn't set to a proper specification. The first guy to sue them lost his case, and he lost his case off of a driver education question made by Toyota's lawyer. Their lawyer, after all of this deliberation and going through all of these things, asked him one final question before he got off the stand, and this is how this guy lost his entire case. And this is proof just to my father-in-law. Maybe you should listen to this one because you'll understand. Learning more and educating yourself every year on even just driving will re-educate you on things that you've forgotten. He lost his case because Toyota's lawyer looked at him and said, at any point when you couldn't hit the brake to slow down your vehicle, because in an automobile, I'm going to point this whole analogy out to you. In an automobile, the gas always overpowers the brake. So if your gas is stuck, no matter how much you push your brake, your car is never going to stop because your gas will always overpower it. But there is one failsafe made into every single vehicle, dating back all the way nearly to the existence of the automobile. Ever heard of a thing called an emergency brake? The emergency brake literally clamps down and locks up the wheels. So no matter if the engine is going, if your emergency brake is actually working properly, it will literally lock up your wheels and slow you right down. They asked that man that question. At any point in time, did you pull your emergency brake? And he says, well, no, I'm in a dire situation. Like, nobody would ever think to do that. Bam, he lost his case. Any good driver automatically knows you would have to do that. And I'll give you another point. Here's my education level. I was going a little too hot into a corner once in my 5-speed, and my car cut out. I have a bad O2 sensor, so every once in a while, if I downshift too hard or I literally miss a gear, it will literally stall out. I'm going about 100 kilometers an hour heading into a 90-degree corner, and my car stalls out. Average driver would hit their brakes. The average driver would wipe out and hit the rock cut that was right in front of me. I'm not an average driver. I educate myself, and I constantly learn how to handle these situations. This was my 3rd year driving a stick shift in my life. I popped the car into neutral, fired her back up, and popped it into gear again. I get it. That still takes time, but you can do that in a very quick amount of time. Neutral, gas, and gear. I didn't hit the rock cut, and I literally drifted myself out of harm's way, all because I understood it. Where an average driver winds up in the rock cut. It's the same thing that goes with people when they lose control of their vehicle in snowy or gravel situations or sandy conditions. They automatically pull their steering wheel the wrong way, or they hit their brakes. I see this all the time on Highway 400 between Barrie and Toronto when they either have whiteout conditions or heavy fog. The first person in hits their brakes. They don't slow down, they hit their brakes, causing a chain reaction because everybody's too close. The average driver, they get scared and hit their brakes. They don't look around you. When you take the young driver's course in Canada, the first thing they teach you is to check all of your mirrors, even before you press the brake. Rule number 1 before getting into the vehicle is to plan your destination and how you're going to get there, so you automatically know the specific way you're going to get there. When you get in, you physically adjust all of your mirrors so you can see everything that you need to see. You make sure the car is in park, you turn it on, you put the car in gear, you completely look around to ensure everything is safe, and then you pull out. If you're pulling out from a side street, you have to put your blinker on before you turn out. Did everybody listening right now understand that every single time, even when you do a 3-point turn, you're supposed to put your signal light on for each direction you're turning in a 3-point turn? So when you turn left backwards, you turn your signal light on. When you turn right backwards, you turn your signal light on. When you turn right forwards, signal light on. Left, you constantly have to change it. It's literally written into your driver's education handbook. How many of us actually do that when we do a 3-point turn? I guarantee you every single person listening didn't even understand that is written into their book. I'd like to point out to everybody listening right now, I'm 40. Last time I read completely through the driver education handbook, like start to finish, and remember all these key points, was over 20 years ago. I pick them up from here or there and read them over to ensure that they haven't changed. But when I first read this, when I was 16 years old, actually 15 because I wanted to get a head start, I didn't know that. I'd never seen anybody do it. But that's because the average driver does not do that. One of those education things, similar to camping in the left lane. An average driver does not know. Every single time you change direction of a vehicle, you are supposed to signal. Today I watched a police officer pull out into a road without using a signal light. Kind of funny how the people who are supposed to abide and uphold all of these laws don't even abide by them. The average driver out there listening right now probably doesn't understand the fact that they miss so many things. And my most hated thing in my hometown are turning lanes. There is one up on the hill by a toy store where it's near the end of the turning lane, but the turning lane is still existent when you're turning in. Yesterday, while going up there, bringing my daughter to the toy store, I watched 4 people with their signal lights on to turn in were turning from the driving lane, sitting next to a turning lane. I have to ask, what's the point of the turning lane if you're not even going to use it? Just like, did you know when you're turning from an extended lane on a roadway in a small subdivision, if the road is a lane and a half wide, you're supposed to move over to the center of the lane if you're turning left to allow flow through traffic to squeeze by you. People don't understand that's actually a rule. Most people are just assholes and they literally park in the center of the lane because they're like, I don't want people passing me. Well, actually, you're supposed to move out of the flow of traffic to turn off a roadway. Now, going out and around them on the gravel is actually a netty no-no, as I like to call them. You're not supposed to do it, and it can be a ticketable offense because you are literally going off the roadway to get around. It's like people in four-wheel drives going on a quad trail next to the roadway or driving on a bike trail to get around somebody. You're not supposed to do that. I know a lot of us have done it. I will say I have on instances. Hell, even using right turn lanes to get around a vehicle that's turning left out of the driving lane when there isn't enough space is technically a do not do as well. You're improperly using a lane. It's similar to using a turning lane as a merge lane. And this is one of those things I see in my hometown all the time. Again, people turn into the turn lane on one of the main throughways and they just keep driving and driving and driving down it until they get an open spot. Well, if somebody else needs to turn in from somewhere, they're going to get into head-on collision. And I've actually seen it happen. You're not supposed to drive in a turning lane. A turning lane, the only time you're allowed to drive in it is when it has a white line or a broken white line next to it. That signifies that turning lane is becoming a turn off lane from the main throughway, and you're allowed to turn into it and move up to the beginning. White line, you're allowed to cross over because white lines indicate a lane and a separated lane, both driving lanes. When it's yellow with a broken line on the side, it is a turning lane, which means you are supposed to turn into it, stop, and wait for traffic to clear to turn into it. Not abiding by that rule is a ticketable offense. 99% of police out there will never give you a ticket for it, but it is a ticketable offense. One of my favorite ones that I actually saw when I first started driving is I used to have to drive a ramp. So I had to drive from one main throughway onto another, and it was actually a merge lane, and it was long enough for you to merge into. There's like maybe a 30-minute window around rush hour in the afternoon that you may have to slow down or even nearly stop to get in because the traffic is so heavy, but the rest of the day it is a merge lane. How many people out there use merge lanes as a yield lane? Yield means you pull up, you stop, and you yield the right of way to traffic. If you can move in, you can slowly move in. If you can't, you stop and wait for a clearing. That's not the purpose of a merge lane. You ever see somebody enter a limited access highway on a merge lane and literally get to the end of it and stop to wait for an opening? No. When you're on main throughways in a city, you're not supposed to do that either, but people do it and they're more inclined to do it. Just like yield signs. A yield sign isn't a stop sign, and I see this all the time in my home city. There's a few areas where people actually use yield signs and will stop at them even if there's no oncoming traffic. Why are you stopping? It's yield. Yield the right of way to the flow of traffic. If you have to stop, you stop. If you don't have to stop, you can continue. Odd, huh? How people get these things wrong. Of course, both signs are red and white, but one's a triangle, one's an octagon. Octagon means stop, triangle means slow and enter. It's kind of like a yellow light. And you always have to remember, yellow lights are one of the most gray areas of every single average driver out there. If you're coming up to it and it turns yellow when you're on the intersection, you don't have to stop. If you're 4 car lengths away and there is nobody behind you, you are actually supposed to stop. At 4 car lengths in the city, you have more than enough time to stop for a yellow light. But how many people blow the yellow light and it turns red when they're in the middle of the intersection? Why do you think there was such a heavy introduction of my most hated traffic ticket video? Red light cameras. They actually cause more accidents than they prevent. There's more rear end collisions that happen at red light camera intersections than any other controlled access intersection that you'll ever find. This has been proven on many parts, but many cities still put them in. And the reason why they put them in my home city, one of the first places to ever have one in, was right in front of the hospital. And the reason why they did that, there are still people that blow through a yellow light when an ambulance is coming out with their lights on. Kind of odd. In my home city, I don't see it, but my in-laws see it where they are because they're in the greater Toronto, Hamilton area, the Golden Horseshoe, basically the cesspool of the entire country of Canada, where the largest amount of manufacturing is, the most amount of people is, but the most amount of arrogance exists. In that area, here's a proof of the arrogance, my in-laws find it weird when they're here, and an ambulance goes down the road, and people move over for an ambulance and stop on the side of the road to let it go by. Down in the Golden Horseshoe in Toronto, people don't do that. An ambulance will sit behind you with somebody on the way that needs to get to a hospital dying in the back. And they won't, even though every car at the intersection is stopped, nobody will go through the red light because they're too scared of the red light camera because there's so many of them. People won't move slightly into the intersection out of the way so the ambulance can get by because they think it's a ticketable offense. It is. But when an ambulance is in right behind you with their lights flashing, you are allowed to move out of its way, inclusive of entering an intersection to move out of its way. Major city people, especially in the province of Ontario, in southern Ontario, don't understand this because they're so scared of all those cameras that have been put in place. You do realize that most people have dash cams. If you get a ticket for entering an intersection in a red light camera, keep your video from your dash cam and bring it in. When you go to fight your ticket, and seriously, take a day off and go and fight a ticket because the only way you ever win is by showing up. When you go in and say you have video evidence that you had to move out of the way for an ambulance, and that's the only reason why you entered the intersection and got that picture. When you show them the proof that you moved out of the way and then a second later the ambulance comes through the intersection, if they still give you the ticket, then I'm sorry, your city really sucks and is really hard up for money because most judges should look at that and state you moved out of the way for the safety of an emergency vehicle. It's like me moving to the side of the road. I can't use the side of the road to get around somebody who's turning left, but I can go off on the side of the road to get out of the way for an ambulance. It's one of those things that's actually in the educational documentation you have to read through to get your driver's license. Average drivers seem to think all kinds of interesting things. High occupancy vehicle lanes, the HOV lanes, where you're allowed more than 2 people in them to try and ease congestion. The average driver who's listening right now understand that these lanes aren't the go 40 to 60 kilometers an hour over the posted speed limit in. They're only created to move vehicles with more people in them. Essentially, they're made for buses and people carpooling. They weren't made for you to use as an express lane to go faster than everybody else in the world. But every single time I get in one of these HOV lanes in the greater Toronto Hamilton area, I'll be going within the flow of traffic, which naturally is always going faster than the posted speed limit. But I always get those few people who ride your bumper because they want to go another 30 kilometers an hour faster than what you're going. They seem to think an HOV lane is a drag strip. It's not. It is not. And you need to utilize it to stay in the flow of traffic. And I'm sorry to say this to all the people out there. If you get into that lane and you seem to think that everybody needs to get out of your way because you want to do 140 on a 100 kilometer an hour highway, then I'm sorry. Get the stick out of your ass, read the documentation, and understand the fact that those lanes are made for carpooling and carpooling only. Now, if you're doing 20 under the posted speed limit, then get all the way over to the slow lane, buddy, because you're in the wrong lane. One of my favorite ones that I actually see more of down south than I do up north are merge lanes. Did you know that when you're in the slow lane and there's a vehicle about to come into the highway and they're trying to merge in, if you don't have a vehicle directly beside you and you have safe distance to move over, you are actually supposed to move over. Written right in documentation for Highway Safety Act, you're supposed to move out of the lane that you are in to make it clear for entering vehicles onto the highway. This is made so that they can safely access the highway. If you stay in that lane and don't move out of the way for them and they have to slow down, they're going to enter the highway at a slower rate of speed, creating an unsafe condition for anybody else behind them or anybody else behind you, because anyone in a merge lane is not supposed to stop in a merge lane. But I see people do this all the time. Ugh, it's annoying. Average drivers, they seem to think once you hand them that license, that's it. You never have to learn ever again. Canada as a country and the province of Ontario is now looking into making it mandatory for people over the age of 65. So once you get close to retirement age, you now have to go in. They're trying to make it right now that every time you have to go in and renew your license every 4 to 5 years, you have to take a written exam. It's already mandatory that once over the age of 85, you actually have to go in every year and take a vision test. And every time you renew a license between every 4 or 5 years, you have to take an actual driver's test to prove you can still safely operate a vehicle. And when they take this driver's license away from those people that have had them for like 70 years, oh man, DMV people, you ever wonder why they're so grumpy? Take away the driver's license of somebody who's been driving for 80 years and think it's their God-given right to drive, and explain to them this is a privilege and you are deemed an unsafe driver. You can't see properly and you can't maintain your vehicle in a safe operational standard. And the people they always take away from who cause the biggest fuss at the DMV are the same people who always complain about transport truck drivers and how they need to be trained every single year to operate those huge machines because they're going to kill somebody if they're not trained properly. The same goes for you in your 5,000-pound sedan. If you can't handle it properly, you are an unfit and unsafe driver for the road, and your privilege of driving will be taken away from you. The average driver seems to think that driving is a right, and it's not. They also seem to think that they're correct about every single thing that they do in driving, which is not correct. And they also seem to think the average driver only understands the main focus of an automobile: the gas, the brake, the gear shift, and filling it with fuel. Most people today don't even know how to change a tire or even add oil to their vehicle. If you don't know how to properly operate and maintain a piece of machinery, you don't know how to operate it properly. As a business owner and you own a forklift, if you don't maintain that and somebody gets hurt, that's on you. You need to understand this. So how come as an automobile owner, you don't have to understand that? The average driver doesn't, and the average driver really needs to learn this. Driving at high rates of speed in four-wheel drives and all-wheel drive vehicles, just because you believe that system will save you, is improper. The average driver seems to think that snow tires will make it so they could drive faster in snow. It won't. I drove for years, and I'm talking about the first nearly decade and a half of my driving existence, on only all-season tires, never winters. My driving habits changed in the wintertime. I got a little slower and a little more cautious. When I got snow tires, I understood that their braking power was better than my all seasons, and their grip was slightly better. In the middle of a snowstorm, even in my four-wheel drive truck, am I that guy doing 100 kilometers an hour in the middle of a snowstorm? No, because I understand my rear-wheel drive pickup truck still has more weight in the front of it, and if I hit a bad patch of ice or a slippery condition on snow, the ass end's going to come out from behind me. But being one of those drivers who properly educates themselves and learns how to properly drive. Yes, I'm going to give you one hint that I learned. Well, technically, I taught myself years and years ago. And about 8 years ago, insurance companies finally said I was right. The number one way to learn how to properly handle your vehicle in bad situations is to train yourself like professional drivers. Go to an empty parking lot at night. Perfect example, wintertime. Go to an empty mall parking lot in the winter when there's a bit of snow on the ground and learn how to throw your car around. When you learn how to control your vehicle in a controlled environment, as per a parking lot, where you're not going to harm anyone else, you learn to understand your vehicle properly and you enhance your driving capability. It makes you the safer driver on the road. When I was 17 going to my first doctor's appointment on my own and had to drive there, it was a snowstorm. My dad called me from work and asked me if I wanted him to call my doctor and cancel my appointment. I said no. It's not that bad of snow. It's about an inch or two on the ground. He says, I'm not scared of you. You understand what you're doing and you understand how that car handles. I'm scared of everyone else on the road. That put a good feeling in my heart, but it also put a scary feeling where every single time I'm out on the road, I'm scared about all of the other drivers around me. The slow people driving in the fast lane, the excessively speeding in the HOV lanes. And my most hated drivers, the people who speed up on a passing lane. I have to ask this question right now to the average driver who's listening to this podcast. When you're on a 2-lane highway and a passing lane pops up, if you're doing bang on the speed limit before the passing lane, are you supposed to speed up on the passing lane? Most people would say yes. The correct answer is no. And until police forces out there start pulling those people over, drivers like myself are just going to get more and more aggravated on passing lanes. There are so many times I've gotten to the point where I've nearly gotten to a speed limit where I would lose my vehicle and be impounded only because the driver in front of me was doing 10 under the speed limit before it and 30 above it when we hit it because they felt safer. An extra lane doesn't mean speed up. It means maintain the speed you were doing so the faster vehicles behind you can safely pass you. Aggravating other drivers on the road is the most dangerous thing in the world. Most average drivers don't understand this. I didn't understand it when I first started driving, and I've done some pretty stupid things when I was younger. Today, I understand those. Racing people, slamming on the brakes at the end of the passing lane so they can't get in front of you, brake checking, they're all part of an aggressive driving behavior. And average drivers are either part of it or create it while driving on the road. And that's something we need to change. Drivers today need to re-educate themselves constantly on new rules of the road and what the original rules that they learned when they got their driver's license. And until governments around the world start imposing that every single time, no matter what age you are, when you come in, you have to do a new written test and driver's test, then the average driver will not understand what they are doing wrong is wrong. Similar to the person who is the most destructive in any business, we've always done it that way, that's the way to do it. Those are the most destructive people in any business because they will not change for the betterment and the growth of society and the business at hand. Education is key to becoming more than your average driver. So like I said, next time it snows or even a heavy rain, go out to that empty parking lot and learn how to operate your vehicle properly. Once you learn and understand your vehicle better, you'll become a better driver. And please, pick up that handbook at least once a decade, read it through, and understand the things that you are supposed to do on the road. Because unfortunately, we have too many average drivers on the road these days. And the more average drivers we have, the more issues we will have in the future. So like I said, re-educate yourself. Go back to school and learn something about the operation of your vehicle. So if you like this podcast, please like, share, or comment about it. Share it on any of the major social feeds that you found it on. Write us a comment on any of the major streaming sites that you have found us on. We love hearing about your comments, and occasionally we will respond to them if they are amazing ones. We learned one not too long ago with our Irish ones that we didn't get back to the person who posted the comment, but they gave us some information about something that they had found at the DeLorean manufacturing site in Northern Ireland that we thought was pretty cool. We'd want to share with you on a future podcast. If you're listening, you'll understand about it. So send us a comment, share this, and click the like button at the bottom on any of the major social feeds or streaming sites from the AutoLooks podcast. The AutoLooks podcast has been brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by Podbeam.com. If you'd like to get in touch with either the Ecom Entertainment Group, the AutoLooks podcast, or Everett J. himself, send an email over to email@autolooks.net. So for myself, Everett J., the AutoLooks podcast, and Ecom Entertainment Group, strap yourself in for this one fun, wild ride that the average driver is going to take us on.